Welcome everyone. Morning. Just waiting for we're just filling up on the attendance list there. Thanks for coming. I hope you're all able to engage with what should be an interesting discussion this morning. We focus this month on our restaurant sector, a sector that's been in the press a lot in the last 2 years, and one that's received widespread coverage and has been particularly affected by the current goings on in the UK, especially and across the globe with the coronavirus pandemic. There's a few faces in the attendance list that I recognise this morning. Some of the delegates I don't as well, which is a good thing. A few from very close to home and some from further afield. Many thanks for taking part in the live element today. Obviously, this will be recorded for colleagues of yours, or if you know anyone who might find this interesting, it will be available on our YouTube channel after this, and there'll be a link to that at the end of the webinar. We're happy to take questions from you via our email links, which will also be at the end of the webinar as well. Please do ask questions of our contributors this morning. As you can see, the chat panel on the right-hand side of the screen. Ask questions throughout. Leslie from Hedgerow Marketing will make sure that she gathers those questions up at the end, and there will be at least hopefully 10 minutes, if we can get our timing right, for there to be those answered by either our panelists or myself and Mike. So that should be interesting. The purpose of today's At Leisure webinar, as I said before, is to engage in a conversational discussion on how the last year has affected the restaurant industry. I'm focusing here in the Southwest by speaking with our panel of guests, all of whom are working at the sharp end of the sector, either from the professional side and the professional services side, in assisting businesses, or as operators on the operational side, and chefs, they're chefs and business owners in their own right. So we will then take a look at the upcoming year, what's in store in 2021, which obviously there are big question marks still hanging over 2021, how the COVID-19 lockdown is currently affecting operators, and what our guests think will be the way forward for restaurants looking at the year ahead, and obviously further into the future as well. So in terms of today's contributors, firstly I'd like to introduce everyone to the webinar, starting with myself. My name is Ollie Steer-Fowler. I'm the head of leisure property at Vickery Holland Property Consultants. I work with the agency and general practice teams doing valuation, business rates work, and agency sales and disposals for the firm based out of Exeter. And I deal with all sorts of leisure property, from hotels, holiday complexes, parks, pubs, all sorts. I'm joined as always on these webinars by my colleague Mike Easton. Mike is our head of hotels and hospitality at Vickery Holland. Mike, if you want to give everybody a wave.
Good morning, everybody. Speak to you in a moment.
We'll be hearing more from Mike. Mike will be giving us his thoughts on the restaurant market at present, as well as engaging with the later discussion, helping me with the Q&A session. Morning to you, Mike. Okay, and we've also got to our external contributors. We're delighted to be joined by a couple of local operators, and also Josh Chauhan from Wolferstans Solicitors, who are based in Plymouth. Josh, if you could just say hi there quickly. I'll give you more time to introduce yourself properly in a minute. Thanks. And for our Q&A a little later, we're delighted to welcome our guest contributors and our guest restaurateurs to the webinar. This morning we have Mark Readman from the Holland Group, and we also have Mark Campbell-Heard from Radius 7. So both the Marks, if you can just quickly give us a wave and say hi, we'll give you an opportunity to introduce yourselves properly later on. And then Leslie in the background from Leslie Anderson from Hedgerow Marketing. She's going to be in the background, who has also kindly agreed to be our, what are we calling you, Leslie, a referee. And she'll be making sure that we don't talk over each other too much with questions and answers, and also collating any questions that we've got on the right-hand side. So format for today, myself and Mike will give a very brief restaurant market update, as well as an overview of the impact that COVID-19's had on the restaurant sector. I will also be doing my level best not to confuse the two Marks and Mike in my head, as I'm terrible with names, so this could be fun. Then Joshua has kindly agreed to give us a talk on his thoughts in the sector at present, businesses adapting to change, as well as the key trends his firm are seeing with their clients in the sector. This will be followed by a question and answer forum with our 2 restaurateur contributors, which will loosely follow 3 topics, which a brief overview of their thoughts on 2020, how that went for them. It's a roller coaster ride for everybody, just regardless of which sector you're in, but restaurateurs, as I've mentioned before, were particularly hard hit. So it'll be interesting to see their thoughts on that. The sector during lockdown 3 now, as we're in, if you call the middle one lockdown 2, this is lockdown 3, and then looking ahead to 2021 and what comes next. And then we'll follow up finally with any questions that you guys have for our panelists. Please feel free to ask, and we will get to them at the end, and we will try to allocate some time for that. Right, we'll now move on to our first section, which is a market update. So we wouldn't be a surveying firm at Vickery Holman without giving some sort of market update, would we, Mike? So I will pass you over to my colleague Mike initially to run through his thoughts on the market for you.
Thanks, Ollie.
Over to you, Mike.
Yeah, keep on board, because it'd be good to have a chat through what both of our experiences are. So
yeah,
restaurants are, very well known and regarded, I suppose, as stands, but as with a lot of sectors, it's sort of predicated by the news on the high street, and perhaps some of the guys that are out in the provinces are a little forgotten as to what's going on. So I will start with the high street though, because it's sort of important to give a general flavour there. I mean, we've seen the huge sort of growth and contraction in the high street, and chains, and a lot of private equity into that sector. And we seem to be stuck in a little bit of a Groundhog Day, really, where we're seeing some well-known failures. We're then seeing some of those sites taken up by new start operators, usually coming out through London and coming out into the big 6 cities, and then out into the regions. And in fact, it seems at the moment that hasn't gone away. We've got a couple of sites at Vickery Holman, and we've been working with some of the owners there, and we're still, again, seeing existing brands that have managed to sort of make it through all the troubles that everyone's had, and they're back into a race for space. Of course, the deals are much harder, and they're almost looking to landlords to help them with their growth aspirations, and they all want to get to some sort of quantum so that they can sort of knock out the competition. And sadly, that doesn't seem to go away. It's predicated by the voucher system, and I think that buys a certain amount of customer loyalty, but it soon goes when you're not offering those deals. Opposed to that, when we look into the southwest, and we look into the small towns and the rural and the coastal areas, and it's fantastic today actually that we're talking to some great operators down in Dartmouth. We're actually seeing those guys doing quite well because they're very much part of their local community. And I think certainly in the last year, we've seen a lot of support both ways, both what restaurateurs are doing for the local community and the community coming back and helping them there. So
yeah, I think that point that you made there about local businesses, that theme of localism and locality is a trend now within the restaurant sector. I think especially when you go into the rural markets, the coastal locations, the beauty spots within the southwest that we seem to have an abundance of, you do get to a point where that localism trend, which has been definitely exacerbated by coronavirus, by the way, seems to be people are foregoing the national chains at the moment and actually looking to their local eateries and going, what can we do here? This is really where I want to spend my time and money.
Yeah, I think the last 20 years, I think we've seen it across hospitality and tourism generally, whereas your customer is just that little bit more educated. And I think where we've ended up, because ultimately, there's been growth in restaurants anyway, but where we've ended up is the customer's a bit more demanding, the customer's a bit more knowledgeable, and certainly the value for money option. When I say value for money, I don't mean cheap food. I mean where the customer feels that they're paying the right price for the right environment, and what they're getting on their plate. And I think they more appreciate actually what's going on in the kitchen and the production of what's coming out. And I think that holds particular sway down in Devon and Cornwall, where we have got a reasonable size population, but it does need to be supported by people that come into our region. Food and drink is part of what we want to do when we're on holiday, really. I think when we talk about the market and what's going on, it's a case that it's been quite quiet, similar with the hotel and the pub markets, where actually stock is pretty low. There's been a lot of government supports, unprecedented supports really, but I think in a way that sort of held off just the natural flow of businesses that come to the market anyway. I think what we have at the moment is we've got a number of applicants that want to buy, but there's no stock for sale. And some of those applicants, by the way, probably worth pointing out, are furloughed head chefs that are looking to start their own businesses. They've had a long time to plot and plan for something like that, but stock is a key issue. I can see that changing. Things are changing anyway. We're coming to the end of some of the government-led supports, and although I think we'll see some extensions to some of that, I think it's when we're all able to open, some of the supports are taken away, that we'll probably see more opportunities for buyers. Because at the moment, there just isn't much out there for them.
What are you seeing from people you're speaking to, Mike? What are you seeing in terms of funding? Because we've heard, quite obviously that there's pessimism amongst lenders at the moment.
I think the reality is across the leisure sector, probably with the exception of self-catering and a little bit in the hotel market, very much it's caution being shown by the lenders. That they have put into the sector, but really the last 10 years, I think there's been little liquidity available in the sector. But what that tends to mean is that the people that are coming through and actually want to make the purchases are coming with large amounts of their own money, and there's something to be said, actually, for the fact that when it's more of your own money, you're probably going to be a little bit more careful with it, and perhaps rather than having a sort of a 3-year hopeful plan, you've actually thinking about it for the longer term, so that there's less of this yo-yoing of stock coming in and out, and people doing well and those that don't.
Yeah, a lot of people, because obviously with the cash flow issues, the government doing their best to stem cash flow issues at the moment with the range of policies that they've got in place and mechanisms that they've got in place. It is very much a wait and see exercise at the moment, and it'd be interesting to see our couple of restaurateurs down in Dartmouth in a minute, see their thoughts on that. Have you got anything further to add there, Michael, before I ramble on about the coronavirus?
No, I think that pretty much covers it off.
Okay, cool. Thank you for that. Quick one from me on the just a general overview of the impact of the pandemic on the restaurant sector, really. So in terms of the impact of the coronavirus pandemic on the restaurant sector, we've seen the large groups who are already really undergoing CVAs in 2018, 2019, especially in the oversaturated casual dining market, have been probably the hardest hit in terms of headline losses and problems since the onset of the pandemic in March 2020. So some have found new ownership during that time, and they've been really the lucky ones in that period of closure, which affected everyone between March and July last year. And the new funding that they got through that has brought with it is meant that it's been very much the survival of the fittest at the big end of the portfolio end of the market. Lenders have been, as we've just mentioned between me and Mike, lenders have been rightfully very cautious throughout the last 18 months with regards to restaurants, but as with the pub and the wider leisure sector, really apart from possibly the small element of the hotel sector and the top end of the holiday park market, so as Mike said, the self-catering market, the raft of measures that have been put in place, such as the government grants, the furlough scheme, business rates holidays, just to name a few, have done what they can to stem cash flow issues for existing businesses where they can and do what they can. On a more local scale, especially around rural and coastal beauty spots, which we're, as I said before, we're blessed with down here in the southwest, the picture is slightly more rosy than it is in the city centre markets. The emerging trend of localisation, as has been touched on slightly already, amongst consumer groups, has seen more and more people favour restaurant and bars locally, and this has certainly been further helped by restrictions on movement, obviously. So where we've got people staying closer to home, keeping things local, restrictive working from home, they are almost forced to stay in their local area more, and therefore they are turning to their local haunts and eateries more often where they can, where restrictions allow. So that can only be a good thing. On a further positive note, the pandemic has seen sharp growth in the takeaway restaurant market, so the food and delivery sector. With people locked down, this has become the only viable option in terms of a dining experience, certainly at the moment in lockdown, as we find ourselves right now in lockdown 3. Growth in UK revenues for these sectors has been significant. It really has. They have really been the out and out winners during the coronavirus pandemic, if you can even call them that. The big winners from this on a macro end of the scale, the established delivery firms, so your Deliveroo's, the Just Eats of this world, but also on a more local level, we're seeing more and more operators at that scale looking to diversify their offerings to cater for a takeaway market. So they've got to be flexible, and it will be interesting again to hear the thoughts of our contributors in a minute in terms of what if they've managed to do anything in the last few months to tailor their model and their business model around that, and make that work for them, certainly in a period where normal revenue streams are not accessible. Finally, again, another positive, but not directly linked to the lockdown, was the last-minute Brexit deal we saw in December 2020. This has removed the threat of tariffs on EU imported food back to the UK, which would have been quite a damaging issue for the sector. 25% of all the UK's food is imported from the EU, so tariffs on this would have been quite significant for the restaurant sector and for the Southwest economy. So that's a good thing. That's a further positive. We'll bring that to a close for myself and for Mike. And we will now move on to Joshua Chauhan from Wolferstans. Josh is just going to give us his thoughts on the sector and from his experience with his clients in the last 12 months. Thanks for doing this, Josh, and joining us this morning. If you could introduce yourself, your role at the firm, and then take it away, that'd be great.
Thanks, Ollie. Brilliant. Yes, so good morning, everyone. My name is Joshua Chauhan. I'm a solicitor at Wolferstans. I work in the commercial property teams, and I also do corporate work as well. So yeah, it's been quite a 12 months for me, as it has been for everyone else. When I was asked to come and to give a talk, then I was thinking about my experiences over the last 12 months, and unlike many lawyers, I thought I'd try and keep it nice and short, and just focus on a few of the key points and a few of my key experiences over the last 12 months or so. So a lot of what I'm going to say is probably going to echo actually sort of what Mike and Ollie have already said. I think that we've all seen sort of general trends in the industry, and I'm going to try and focus again, rather unusually for a lawyer, on the positives and on some of the optimistic stories I've seen. Because I've worked with some businesses that were really concerned last March, but actually have been able to weather the storm reasonably well. I'm sure none of us would have chosen the last 12 months as they've been delivered to us, but actually some businesses have really been able to weather it better than others, I suppose. So yeah, and I think in general as well, just again to pick up on a few points that Ollie made in particular, we're seeing lots of local businesses in the legal sector coming to us looking to take on leases of units, even now and throughout the previous lockdowns, obviously with the long-term view that this won't last forever. And there are some fantastic opportunities here to get a business to fit out the premises and then to be ready to hit the ground running when we reach some sort of normality. So it's all very encouraging on that basis, and it encourages local businesses, I think, in contrast to the normal situation we've got, where some of the larger businesses that aren't so local just continue their ever expanding growth out into the corners of the country like we have down here. So the three areas I just wanted to focus on really are leases and sort of commercial property and what I've experienced there. I'll also talk a little bit about some of my clients who I've worked with, and we've come up with some really great legal solutions to change the structure of their business. A lot of what Ollie was saying about some businesses working on this sort of takeaway model, and actually there's a lot that goes in behind the scenes to give effect to that if it's done properly, and if it's done properly it can be done to work really well. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about that, and then just an honorary mention really to some of the employment law questions we've been having. I'm not an employment lawyer myself, but having seen my colleagues deal with a lot of the questions that they have, I just thought I'd just mention that that's another area which we've been having a lot of questions in relation to from the hospitality sector in particular. So in terms of leases, the main sort of queries that we've been having, of course, initially we were asked a lot about rent holidays and approaching landlords asking for side letters to reduce rent over a certain period of time. It's always a difficult area to navigate, and obviously whether you're acting for landlord or tenant, that there are differing interests there. But originally that was a lot of what we were getting, and then around July, as we saw the end of the first lockdown, if you will, I noticed quite a change in what we were seeing. We weren't seeing so much that pessimistic view, but quite a lot of the businesses coming to us were saying, well, we appear to be having a summer, so we probably should do something to maximise that. And obviously, in the background, you've got the government schemes, and you know, the effectiveness of those schemes is not for me to judge, because of course the people listening to this probably have a much better idea than I. But nonetheless, alongside that, quite a few of my clients were asking me about variations of leases, changing premises, not just to shut down their business, but actually thinking, well, if we can take on a larger premises, or we can take on a premises with an outdoor space, what practical advantage might that give, not only during the summer of 2020, but also beyond, when people's habits when they eat out might actually be different. So that's a lot of what I saw, and some of the other matters that we encountered as well were alterations. So people deciding that their business premises might need to change to reflect the fact that they'll need to put coronavirus measures in place. I saw some quite creative solutions as far as that was concerned. But of course, some of that was long term. Some businesses thought, well, this is probably going to be here for quite some time, so we probably should adapt our premises accordingly. And of course, there's always a legal perspective to that, and particularly where we've got commercial leases, and the interests of landlords and tenants are not always aligned, but I think we can probably say over the last 12 months, it's more likely that they have been aligned, because landlords don't want empty property and tenants would like premises. And so I think we've seen more compromises than we otherwise would have. So in terms of leases, that's what I've seen. The next area is probably the most interesting, well, to myself as a corporate lawyer anyways. We've seen lots of businesses that perhaps would never have entertained the idea of delivering takeaway services. Some of them have really changed their model almost unrecognisably to provide these fantastic services where you can buy a meal for two in a click and collect fashion, or you can sort of work with delivery partners, not necessarily just the big boys such as Deliveroo, but also some local players as well, and actually finding some really creative solutions. And I know of one particular success story, particularly in Plymouth, where we worked with the owners to try and put legal framework in the background, and they're having a great experience now. They're obviously still waiting for the days where they can open their doors and carry on business as usual, but it almost gives another dimension to their business moving forward. You know, there may very well be a demand for it beyond the coronavirus. And in addition to that as well, one of the matters I wanted to just mention briefly was that back in February, I acted for someone who bought a business, sort of a cafe business, if you will, and of course that was shortly before the world came crashing to an end in the following month. And we had a conversation actually just after the lockdown. This was someone that I'd obviously acted for in the purchase. And we had a conversation about how they could adapt their business. And it becomes apparent that there are some creative solutions here as well. So yeah, anyway, so as far as what I've seen in terms of businesses adapting their plans, I've seen some really creative solutions there. And then just to wrap up, really, as I said, we've had a lot of questions, because ultimately, I've heard it said before that a business's most important resource is its people. And of course, you can have the premises, but if you haven't got employees that are willing to come to work in those premises, then that can be a problem. There've obviously been the usual questions in the background in relation to, you know, the usual sort of workforce dramas. One of my employees has done this, what do I do? And then we've also had some novel questions as well. For example, we've had some employees not so keen to come back to work given the current situation, and resisting that suggestion, particularly if they work in, say, the restaurant sector, where they're seeing a lot of people, regardless of what measures are in place. There's still there's only so far that can be mitigated through the use of PPE, etc. And so I think we've seen some really interesting and novel questions that we would never have imagined 12 months ago on that front as well. So yeah, in short, I think that's all that I wanted to say. I wanted to keep this quite brief because I'm conscious that we've got other people to talk as well. Those are some of my key observations over the last 12 months.
Thanks, Josh. That's great. Yeah, really, really insightful as well. And thanks for keeping it brief because you've got a few other people as well to speak to. I mean, just where you mentioned, you're constantly speaking to clients. You've got a fairly decent handle on what their thoughts are towards 2021, and a big, sort of issue that we're trying to address today is people's view towards 2021 and trying to get an angle of not just our contributors, but obviously if your clients have been speaking to you about moving forward. What are their views towards, say, the government the government assistance ending in what is looking like it's going to be April at the moment? I mean, it's more than likely it will continue, and because of the current lockdown and how long that's going on for. But are they quite pessimistic towards 2021? What's the general sort of feel?
Sure. It's an interesting question, Ollie. I think there's a mixture of feeling out there. I think that for so long as we don't have any sort of concrete promises as to what the government's putting in place for this year, there is some anxiety, but I think the general theme I'm seeing is some resilience, actually. And I think there are some business owners that are really determined, regardless of what is given in terms of assistance, to try to make the most of it. But yeah, I think generally speaking, most of the business owners that I work with have a more optimistic than pessimistic view. And I suppose that's probably because the last 12 months have taught them that if they can survive that, then they can probably continue to survive as we get back to normal. So yeah, generally quite a good picture there.
Sarah's just, hang on a second. Sarah's just, but Joshua has mentioned operators looking to change premises and alter their existing premises. If I can help, she'd be happy to help. She'd be happy to help you with that. So Joshua, you have to get in touch with Sarah after this. That's great. Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, so just out of curiosity, what sort of operations were the new ventures you've been talking to looking to open? Was it more takeaway based then, or were they looking for sort of traditional leases to take out?
I suppose business owners playing the long game, and I think you and Mike mentioned that lenders are generally, I wouldn't say running scared, sounds a bit alarmist, but a little bit cautious, more cautious than ever at the moment. And so there have been quite a few businesses I've seen where private investors are coming in and sort of they're buying into a sort of a special purpose company, a business, and then waiting for the days that they can open their doors. Not too many of those though, because generally speaking, as you say, I think there are some businesses thinking we can buy a small premises and run a fantastic takeaway service out of it. Obviously that's a niche market and it doesn't necessarily transpose across the entire restaurant sector, but there's been more of that than I've ever experienced over the last 12 months.
Yeah, a lot of people sitting on their hands. It's impossible to make prediction as to when things will ease up, and it will be all eyes on the 22nd, isn't it? Really, and what Boris is going to do. Josh, that's really, really kind of you. Thank you for doing that today. We'll come back to you right at the end of the webinar as well, if that's okay. But I'll take the opportunity at the moment to bring in Mark Readman and Mike, see if I can. And yeah, I think, Mike, you're going to run our first Q&A and I'm going to run our second Q&A. Is
Absolutely.
that right? You happy with
Absolutely.
that?
Absolutely. We'll just, if Mark can just pop his camera on, if that's okay.
Yeah, Mark, pop his camera on and his microphone on. I will hop off. Mark, if you'd like to firstly introduce yourself. Obviously, you're from the Holland Group. Thanks very much for your time this morning, because I know you're a busy man. If you're just able to introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your business, then Mike will jump into the Q&A.
Yes, morning everybody. My name is Mark Readman, General Manager for the Holland Group. We are owners and operators of 2 restaurants in Dartmouth, both the Angel and Platform 1. We also run a holiday letting business, Dartford Holidays, and a small, or rather quite large, retail outlet as well. We're all based in Dartmouth and highly susceptible to the seasonality that Dartmouth brings, but also the hopefully sort of linking into the locals as well. So that's what we do.
Thanks, Mark. In fact, we're really pleased to have you on, because you've got a slightly, I suppose, a broader view than just specifically restaurants. What we're tending to see when we're running through our sectors is that we've got quiet confidence from the accommodation guys, and then that sort of just ripples down, because in effect all of their bookings are much longer term, and so they've got an idea of what's coming forward. I mean, I guess that sort of helped with your business generally, really, having a bit more of an understanding of what's going to happen this year.
Yeah, very much so. I think it gives us a sense of optimism, because we know that the great British public are itching to get out and have a vacation of some sort. Whether they probably won't be able to travel abroad again this year, so we are seeing significant forward bookings for our holiday lets, and therefore that gives us great confidence that as soon as we're allowed to open, we will be busy in terms of the restaurants as well. So it's just a waiting game at the moment. We can't wait for the government to say, the restrictions are relaxed.
Yeah, that's fair enough. If I look at last year then, and how it all sort of impacted the type of business that you have, give us a bit of an overview as to the initial response to lockdown 1, and then really what happened when we came into summer. I know we've talked about you to help out, and it'd be good just to get a general flavour, I suppose, as to the impact on the ground for you, employees, and business.
Yeah, well, last year obviously was interesting for all of us. So this time last year we were in exactly the same position. We were gearing up for the seasons ahead. We had Easter coming up. We had order books full of holiday makers coming down, and we were very, very optimistic of a very successful summer. March the 23rd, that all came to an end. It started to peter out anyway, because of the prevalence of the pandemic started to grow, and we started to realise that people were starting to not come of their own accord anyway. And then obviously we were then plunged into lockdown, a complete vacuum of anything. Luckily the furlough scheme helped out, but and then it was a waiting game again. We didn't know what the rules would be, and then as we approached the unlocking of the lockdown, we started to get a sense of what we would be allowed to do, and then we all started scrabbling around for bits of perspex and ways of separating our customers from each other, and the effect of that was to reduce the size of our restaurants. The Angel, for instance, is only a 35-seater restaurant anyway, so we went from 35 to 28 if we were completely fully booked, and that also obviously affects your profitability, and you start to question whether or not you even should be open. But my other is a champagne and seafood restaurant with a large outdoor area, and obviously that was perfectly placed for the marketplace that we had last year. And so we had a very successful summer season. In fact, we were so busy that we were unable to accommodate everybody that wanted to either stay with us or book with us, and that meant that one of the things that was mentioned earlier about the localities aspect of it, it meant that the locals were all pushed out, and therefore you had this large influx of tourists dominating the place, and upsetting the locals who were trying to support their local businesses. But anyway, then we had a successful period, very successful period, and then we ended up in lockdown 2, which we were sort of accustomed to by that point, so we knew how to wind down, how to reduce stock levels and all that stuff. We were already ready for it. Obviously our visitors stopped coming accommodation-wise, and we tried to drift into a Christmas period, which obviously then never happened either. So we've sort of lockdown 2 and lockdown 3 sort of much joined together, really. Dartmouth is a very, very seasonal place, so the winter time is very quiet anyway. So the fact that we've been closed during sort of January, February this year hasn't really affected us that much, because the furlough scheme and the grants, etc., has actually meant we're pretty much where we would be anyway. So that hasn't hurt us.
Funnily enough, it's interesting. I mean, a number of the operators we've talked to across the sectors, most people have the opportunity to look at their business and make some changes that perhaps they wouldn't have made if they were just continuing to run week on week, year on year. And it certainly seemed, as we got to the end of last year, a lot of businesses, because we are so seasonal in the Southwest, actually took the opportunity to say, we're going to close our business down, reopen. Probably they were thinking March and April, and might be a little bit later now, but to try and make improvements, physical improvements. Did you run any takeaway options during the period, just to understand your operation?
Yeah, we tried takeaway as far as both restaurants were concerned. What we found during the first two lockdowns was that every conceivable restaurant, pub, tried a takeaway of some sort. And the trouble in Dartmouth in the southwest was that because all the customers had left, all you had was a few locals who then had their choice of any sort of takeaway that they wanted. So we tried it. It wasn't that successful. It wasn't very profitable. So we let it go. Incidentally, we tried it again as far as the Angel is concerned for Valentine's Day last weekend, and to a certain degree of success. But I'm not very optimistic that a full-time takeaway service is going to be successful.
No, I can understand. I think it is very much case by case, and I think that's actually across the board. We look at how uneven the playing field is. So size of your venues, part of that. If you've got to cut your numbers down, if you've no outside trading area, takeaway doesn't work to your local demographic. It is, as I say, it isn't straightforward for everybody. So as we move into this year, we're all starting to sort of gear up, hope that we can open as soon as practically possible. What are your thoughts for the year ahead? And one of the other things with that, government support's been a big thing for us. Any thoughts on what really should continue in the longer term that's going to help your business?
Yeah, I mean, as I said at the start, we are very, very optimistic of a very successful summer if we're allowed to have one. And the sooner it starts, the better, because we've got Easter just around the corner, which is a traditionally very busy time. As far as the government help is concerned, the VAT reduction down to 5% has been enormously helpful. We're owner-operators, so therefore we've gained rate relief and that sort of thing as well. So the cost side of things has been kept down during both periods of when we've been busy and when we've not been busy. So we've been very fortunate as far as our restaurants are concerned that we're one of the lucky ones that have either had an outdoor space or enough space or enough government help to tide us through both successful periods and quiet periods. As far as going forward for this year is concerned, a permanent reduction to 5% I think is the best way to go, because that would support all businesses equally rather than benefiting some like a rate relief type help or even loans would be. So I think something that would benefit the whole industry, like a 5% rate relief. So VAT relief would be the way to go. But we are enormously optimistic. We just want to be let go.
Thank you. And funnily enough, that is the mood of the piece. Is massive resilience, I think, in the trade, and that quiet optimism. And it is how quick can we safely open up? Because we feel that consumers out there, they want to come out and do some of the things that they've been missing out on for so long. Yeah,
exactly. And the people did come out last year. Obviously, they weren't spending money on foreign travel and flights, etc. So they had a lot more disposable income. So for the first time, you saw people coming in who weren't looking at the the prices on menus, and that was very, very pleasing as well. So we sold more lobsters last year than any other year.
That's amazing. Mark, thank you for your time, and we may well come back at the end for some Q&A. So appreciate your thoughts. Thank you very much. So Ollie, if I can hand back to you, if that's okay.
Yeah, please do that. Thanks for that. That was really interesting, guys. Positivity, as you said, Mike, there. Positivity is the big sort of theme of today's talk, really, and resilience. And we're seeing there with what Mark said, that there is both of those things in abundance. There's resilience within the sector, and the positivity to look towards to 2021. And it all does hinge really on the government policy. I personally feel that we're in a situation where the government have every right, after what happened last year, to be a little bit more cautious than they were perhaps at the end of lockdown 1. However, this time round, we've obviously got a sizable vaccination programme going around the country. So, it's very much a fingers crossed exercise that we get as much of the summer as we possibly can. In order to sort of maximise what is a burgeoning customer and consumer sentiment within the UK, to get out, enjoy themselves, have a holiday, see the beauty of the Southwest, and get back out there and lead as normal a life as we possibly can under whatever restrictions the government put in place throughout the summer. So yeah, really interesting, and thanks again to Mike and Mark. We'll hopefully have enough time to bring them back in for some questions at the end. I'd like to welcome Mark Campbell-Heard from Radius 7 now. Mark, if you could just quickly turn on your camera. So Radius 7 restaurant in Dartmouth as well, so another Dartmouth restaurateur. But Mark, if you'd like to introduce yourself and your business, and then we'll go from there.
Yep. Good morning, everyone. My name is Mark Campbell-Heard. So I'm the restaurant manager in Radius 7. So we're actually just outside Dartmouth in a village called Stoke Fleming. We are a part of a holiday park. We're on the main road just off of it. So we've got a nice bit of traffic coming past us to see us, which is nice. So our main focus as a restaurant is local produce. So our name Radius 7 implies that where possible, we source our ingredients and our drinks within that 7-mile radius, and we're lucky because the area we live in has such amazing produce. We mainly a dine-in restaurant. We do run a takeaway service and act as a bar for our locals and anyone staying in the area. So trying to deal with a lot this year, but it's been good.
Yeah, so my comments then, if you source everything from within a 7-mile radius, then Mark, my comments on the EU tariffs earlier on just were not necessary, were they, for yourselves?
No.
Mark, tell us about 2020. Give us a sort of overview from your guys' eyes. Obviously, we've heard Mark Readman's comments. It'd be interesting to see you've got a slightly different setting to Mark, who has very much got a multifaceted business there. But with you guys being on a holiday park, how did 2020 go? Was it very much broadly in line with the holiday park market?
Yeah, I mean, it's nice for us to know. Obviously, having the holiday park and being managed by them, we can see the bookings that are coming. We know what to expect, and the same going into this year. So we know, the volume of the park will reflect on kind of the volume of the restaurant. It's only I say a third of our custom comes from the park. The rest of it is huge support from locals, and from talking to the guests, that we have a lot of people that are staying in the sort of local sort of Airbnbs and things like that. So a really nice mix of sources of our guests. It's been really good. But yeah, 2020 for us was fascinating, but it was hard, but it was really good fun. We only have a small team, so I'm very much on the floor. I was there, every opening hour pretty much through the very long summer, which for me was great. Really nice talking to people, just to see, it was interesting. Someone was saying, I think Mike was talking about the educated guests. I think people do know a lot about what what they're eating and yeah, I think a lot of that comes from telly. There was a lot of programs on television that sort of gives you an insight into the chef's world and the restaurant world, and people are interested,
and
and it encourages.
Do you think that sentiment comes about really from that everybody's got more of a climate sensitive head on their shoulders now? Everybody is more sustainability driven. Do you think it's partly down to that?
Yeah, I suppose it is. And actually, as a business that focuses on local produce, and actually, yeah, and a lot of that kind of ties in with that, and veganism and all that kind of stuff, and how that connects to the climate, and a lot of that it ties together nicely.
Yeah. How was your 2020 summer then? What sort of were levels of trade similar to the year before, or how was it? Was it as busy as everybody? It seems as though everybody had a pretty good summer.
Yeah, we had. Yeah, it was a very long, very good summer. But for me personally, I actually joined the business. I reopened the business after the first lockdown, so I took the job just before, and was fortunate enough to keep my furlough with my previous job. So for me, it was moving to a new job under new restrictions, not knowing anything about how it was going to go. Apart from, like I said, I knew we were going to be busy in the park, so that would reflect in our in our trade, and it was a learning curve. It took a while for us to kind of find our feet, but we adapted, and the staff were fantastic as well, and I think, and the customers are particularly amazing at adapting to we were very honest about the situation that we were in, and they watched the news, they knew what was going on, and I think people were very generous and accepting to the situation that we were in, and they could see that it was a difficult situation.
Yeah. So I mean, because you guys have got good good road prominence there and everything. So there's a lot of drive-by trade, and it's I mean, it sounds as though for you, 2020 was as much a personal journey for yourself as the business it was in terms of overcoming the challenges, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, I think I said to you before, this is my first restaurant that I've run as well, so it was a experience on a whole other level.
It was 2020 was a true experience. Eat out to help out. What sort of did that help you guys? Was that something that you really got on board with, or noticed the major benefits from? No,
so we did sign up to it. I don't think it was a necessary thing for a business. I don't think it helped us at all. I think if anything, it was an issue. And I know for a lot of businesses, because I went out on those odd lunch times and to benefit from it as a customer, especially having a family, it was great having money off. But it did affect the way businesses run. I saw a lot of greed because there was this opportunity to make. I know it's difficult. A lot of businesses really struggled financially at the beginning of the year, and this was an opportunity for maybe them to bring it back in, but it seemed to affect a lot of places negatively. Yeah. So they lost their ability to give a good service or a good product because they were focusing more on the volume and just cramming as many people in as possible, which at that time was not a great idea because we were where we are now.
Absolutely. No. So, staying on that theme of government policies, I mean, it's looking as though we're going to be going back to a tiered system when this lockdown ends. Was that a real hindrance for you guys? Things like the 10 p.m. curfew, rule of 6. Was that something that really affected you guys last year when it came in at the back end of the summer?
Yeah, I remember when the curfew first came in, it was a big hit. And when things like, and it was later on when they stopped groups mixing, I think that was after reopening after the November lockdown, you really saw an impact of, something that was great about the summer was being able to have groups of friends who were sort of small bubbles come in and have a drink or have a drink late, which, that last hour of drinking after the kitchen closed for us was a really good little earner. And to lose that, it was a noticeable impact over those first couple of weeks.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see where the cases comparatively throughout the whole last 12 months in the Southwest comparatively have been low. They've still been high, obviously, because that's why we're in a national number. It will be interesting to see what our tiering restrictions are. Obviously, there was the big Cornwall-Devon divide last time, so it will be really interesting as we get towards the summer. If that is the case, as it seems to be, the murmurs from Whitehall, is where it's going. It will be interesting to see where we stand. Hopefully the 10 p.m. curfew thing is not a thing again. Because a lot of people we've spoken to have mentioned that, especially if you've got a bar element like you guys have, and that sort of, as you say, after you've closed your kitchen, that can really hit businesses. Tell us about your takeaway service. Is that a really big element of your business, or is that something that's evolved throughout the last year?
It was something we had to. It's a business that always ran a takeaway part of the restaurant, but it was trying to find a way to make it work that didn't impact our. Because we've only got a small kitchen and a small team, particularly after reopening last year, and a new team as well. It was trying to find a way of not allowing the takeaway to impact on our dining in guests who were spending that bit more money. And there were nights where we had to close it early or close it completely, because our focus, our biggest focus of 2020, and this is what we said right from the beginning, was consistency. So about really planning ahead and trying to make sure that we set a standard, and little things like the takeaway, which could have made us a lot more money if we were able to kind of adapt to kind of accept a bit more, but we didn't want to impact on the actual quality of what we were producing and the service we were providing.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, no, on that theme of looking ahead, then 2021 for you guys. What are your thoughts on the season ahead, and policies in place? Echoing what Mark and Mike were talking about, really. Mark commented on he would like to see the 5% VAT reduction kept in place. Is that something that you guys are looking towards as a possible solution for sort of the long-term stability of the sector?
Yeah, I said to you before, I don't have a lot of input into the financial side of it, but I am aware that it's been very useful. There's other support from the government that have been great. Furlough was amazing for us. It's just to be able to give my staff a bit of confidence, the fact that they're going to get a wage, whether it be 80% or the top up that was during the sort of December time. And that we can keep a job. We don't have to let people go just because we can't be open. Or
no, and then at the moment that's due to end in April, but we don't know. We don't know if that's going to be extended. So I suppose, as I said earlier, it's going to be all eyes really on the 22nd, isn't it? And what Boris has come up with. Yeah,
but yeah, we're confident about this year.
Yeah.
I think it will reflect. It'll be very similar to last year, but actually, we're a lot more prepared for it. We have restrictions in place. We've got those risk assessments. We've got an understanding. There's training put in place with the staff, and the customers. The customers will understand the process a bit better. So, whereas we had to spend a lot of time focusing on what the customer was doing and how they were acting. And that kind of pulled us away from doing the things we needed to be doing on top of that. The education is there. So, it will be easier from that perspective to not have to manage the customers as well as the staff.
No, fair enough. No, that's great. Mark, listen, I'm conscious of the time, but we could go on chatting about your business for the next 3 days. Really, we need an hour just to have individual conversations with everybody, but thanks for your insights there. It's been really, really valuable.
No, thank you.
I'm just going to take a quick moment now just to see, we've got a couple of questions that came in earlier, from Kev. Hi Kev, by the way, because he's actually been a contributor on a past At Leisure webinar. Home delivery and collection, either using your own system or the Just Eats of this world, have been a big hit locally. Further up country, curbside collection has proven very popular as it reduces contact and very convenient. I've not seen many local businesses offer this. Has anyone else? Mike, have you seen anybody offering? I know that there's a couple local restaurants to me. I'm based in North Devon, that have offered the curbside collection, because that is essentially their restaurant offering just without the takeaway element. It's a little bit easier than actually organising the delivery service, isn't it? Have you heard of any other operators doing that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few out there. I think the reality is that, I think Mark Readman touched on it earlier. Last year, when businesses were looking to try and sort of bring this forward to help with cash flow, everybody sort of had a bit of a go at it, and I think over time that's just become less and less people. So you've got more and more success stories from less people, really.
Yeah.
and some of the local operators here, I'm sort of mid-Devon, they almost seem to be sharing up the days that they're doing things so that they're not competing directly. So, you know, some guys that are doing, you know, roast on a Wednesday, and then every other Sunday, and everyone's hopping around. I think people are trying to help each other out. But yeah, you know, there's a market for contactless, no two ways about that. But I think when we get back to a more even keel, I like the social experience of being surrounded by others.
You're never going to replicate that. That's the thing. But no, it's interesting on that point. John earlier put that Rick Stein Group are experiencing huge growth in their home delivery service. They're actually looking for more warehousing space in Cornwall. So they're clearly, you know, that's you don't just rent warehousing space for a month and then be done with it. It's going to be, they're looking more to the future for that. That's going to be a longer term thing, isn't it?
Yeah, but I think that's down to your you know, the offer of the food that you're actually going to put out there. And I think for the type of food that Rick produces, actually, it can be wrapped up in the box and delivered quite effectively. Probably more effectively than through the restaurant kitchen.
I've been in the Padstow queue for fish and chips, don't worry.
Haven't we all?
Well, actually, by the time I actually joined the queue, I wasn't actually in Padstow. I was sort of a little bit outside.
Holland Bay.
Good stuff. Right, let's see what else we've got. We've got Dawn. Dawn has said, do guests believe that the demand for takeaway and delivery boxes will continue when restrictions are eased and lifted? I mean, it'd be interesting to see Joshua's thoughts on that, see if he's had any clients who have who sort of look to either start that, or whether they are looking towards the future to continue that, really, and not just sort of it drops off a cliff and there's no more demand for it, whether that's going to become permanently part of their business models. Josh?
Yeah, thanks, Ollie. I think that's an interesting question, and it's probably, as Mike was saying, it's a case-by-case basis thing. Some businesses, in my experience, those that are more based around perhaps Plymouth and some of the larger areas where you can service a larger clientele, whereas obviously if you're in a bit more of a rural area, then you perhaps have less people in that immediate vicinity. So those that are sort of more urbanized, I think they are genuinely looking at it, and perhaps even when they put it in place, thought there might be people, particularly some of the younger clients that we might be otherwise servicing, that sometimes don't always want to go out to eat, but might still want that experience. I think on the other side of things, there is a huge element that you're missing out on if you're having a takeaway experience, and a lot of consumers are missing that. So I think it certainly won't be, from what I can tell, at the same level that it is now. But I think for some businesses, they have one eye on whether it's viable in the future. Yeah.
No, thanks, Josh. That's great. I will just point people's attention to Robin Barker, who is a regular contributor to the show. Is recommended the consumer tracker research, which is linked on the right hand side. Really informative for the guys who joined us live today, if you do want to check that out. And we will put a link in the comments on the YouTube channel later on, so that you can catch up with that as well, because that does give some really accurate and informative changes in consumer attitudes, confidence and demand. So do check that out. Interesting with the theme of locality, and I think Mark R made the point of seasonality in a lot of the southwest resort towns and villages. Sue put, no, I live in Loo, and there's only a couple of restaurants who might have the right space to do this type of business. Most establishments are closed pending the lockdown opening. It appears to be that we're going back to the old style seasons where we open in the summer and close in the winter. I feel that there's been a bit of a move towards, in the last 5 years, certainly down in Cornwall. I've got a business down in Cornwall as well, which has been heavily reliant on a March to October holiday season in the past. I think that there has been, a shift away from the seasonality and more activity in the winter, certainly. But this has obviously exacerbated the seasonality again, so definitely. Hopefully that's reverses over a longer period of time again. So Seb has put, as a web business, we've had a huge take up in web ordering services and hospitality and restaurants in the UK. It's really keeping case by case, as every business is different for the online market. Any help, please shout. Will do, Seb. Thank you for that. That's great. Latest stats from Kev is showing contactless dining and adoption is at 34% despite concerns around loss of personal touch. 86% of consumers believe service was the same or better. Those that use contactless dining are likely at 20% more. That's interesting, Kev. No, thanks for that. There's been some really good stats and points there on the right-hand side and worth revisiting. I mean, really, just to wrap up, because I'm conscious of the time, and sorry we're not able to get through all of the comments and questions for our contributors. Just to wrap up for the time, I think that the overriding theme, as both Marks, Joshua and Mike have said, and myself, is positivity and resilience in the sector. I think that there is a huge appetite amongst Southwest restaurateurs to, make the most of what summer we are given, spring and summer we are given, and then really forge on in a resilient fashion through 2021 and towards the future by adapting and taking advantage really of the fantastic location we have down in the Southwest here. We're extremely fortunate. So, we're out of time. I'd like to just take this opportunity to thank everyone who's managed to make it live to the presentation today, to the webinar today. I'd like to thank our panelists, Joshua Chauhan, Mark Campbell-Heard, Mark Readman, as well as my colleague, of course, who joins me always, Mike Easton, for giving up their time to be here and providing really valuable insight. I hope that you've all found it informative, and should you need to get in touch with us, we will make sure that our contact details are here. So please feel free to pop me an email, contact me on LinkedIn or Mike. Thank you, Leslie, as well, for helping to organise the webinar, the invitations, everything in the background that goes on. She does a lot of work for us, and it's very helpful because I'm no good at organising things. But yeah, all that's left to say is just to have a fantastic rest of the day, and everybody stay safe and keep well. And thanks very much for watching. Take care.